Hey everyone, my name is Shanice and welcome back to my channel. Today I am sharing with you my entire TBR for my 2023 Reading Across Latin America challenge. I started this for myself last year. The basic premise of this and the reason why I chose to do it is because, one, as a reader, I want to just expand my reading horizons. I want to read more vastly from as many countries, as many places as I can. And, as a Latina, as a Dominican, I just want to be more in touch with my own cultural literature too. I'm largely disappointed in Latinx representation in all spheres, but especially when it comes to literature. I get that we have big names that everyone should read, but typically when I see those names and people picking them up, I can't help but notice just how homogenous the group is, largely men of a certain class, of a certain education, of a certain racial, ethnic background, from typically the same countries, just getting largely overrepresented, in my opinion, though again, not to say that you shouldn't read those big authors from Latin America. I think everyone should, of course, but there are just so many countries within Latin America and so many languages that are actually supposed to be represented within that identity, as well as so many races, so many ethnic groups, so many religions, so many diaspora communities. The list goes on and on about just how rich Latinx people are. And though I am using the term Latin American, it's very faulty. It doesn't really hold solid ground often. The definition that I'm going to be using is kind of the accepted one, although it kind of varies for different people. Basically, when I say Latinx, Latin American, I am referring to the group of people that reside in countries in the Western Hemisphere that were once conquered by Spanish, French, or Portuguese empires. Already, even with this definition that I'm using, you can kind of already see the flaws, because with that definition, wouldn't the United States also be part of that? I'm not going to include it, obviously, but yeah, it's a term that's forced upon us that doesn't really make any sense. I feel like we're more than just our colonial past, but whatever. I think it's a little bit more exciting because I get to try literature from Haiti, from Guadeloupe, from Saint Barthélemy, as well as, I guess, the more accepted Latino countries like Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Mexico, and Chile, and all of the rest. So with that being said, and with that kind of funky definition aside, let's begin with the first book on my TBR, and that's my January pick, which I've actually already read. I reviewed it already in my January wrap-up, and it's Ida Faubert's Island Heart. This was translated by Danielle Legros George. It was originally published in 1939. It had 45 poems. This is the first edition translated into English, and George actually translated 34 of the poems that she thought captured Faubert's style the best. This is a poetry collection that really focuses on nature and themes of whispering and longing. There's so much passion, there's so much emotion in this, nothing is held back. It's largely influenced by 19th century romantic poetry, and was very different from maybe more modernist poetry and literature of its time. Faubert wanted to go a little bit more traditional in her own writing. So yeah, she is from Haiti. Her father was a Haitian president. Her mother was a white French woman. She spent a lot of her childhood in France because she was kicked out of Haiti because of her father. He was exiled, and so she moved to France to live with her mom, was educated there, and she had a lot of privilege. She was biracial, bicultural, and then when she returned to Haiti, she was accepted into the cultural elite, and is considered one of Haiti's most influential female poets and poets in general. So yeah, this was my January pick. And so my February pick, the one that I'm currently reading and in the middle of, is called Museo Animal, and translated to Natural History in English. There is, thankfully, an English translation for those of you who read in English and would like to read this yourself, because you can't necessarily read it in the original Spanish. This one was published in 2017 and was written by Carlos Fonseca. He was born in Costa Rica, spent a lot of his childhood in Puerto Rico, so he's Costa Rican and also Puerto Rican. So this one is very unique. It's told in an experimental-ish style. Lots of influences from Italo Calvino. You know, I'm not finished with it, like I said, but I'm definitely seeing like If on a Winter's Night a Traveler vibes. Also maybe a little bit of The Shadow of the Wind. But basically what it's about is the narrator, he is a natural history curator. He lives in New Jersey, and he gets this weird invitation from a fashion designer who, like him, is interested in natural history and the animal kingdom, and they kind of spark this friendship. She wants him to collaborate with her on this exhibition, and through their work in that, they have these philosophical discussions about art and the animal kingdom and nature and politics and all of that. And then fast forward to 7 years later, that fashion designer has died, and so the curator, again the narrator of the story, finds the record, the archives of that collaboration that never actually was completed, that he had with the fashion designer, and he starts realizing that there are clues about this fashion designer's mysterious life, and so he goes on this quest to kind of find out who she actually was. It's very cerebral, but also fun and adventurous. So I'm very excited to see how this one turns out. Then for the month of March, I chose a classic from Paraguay, and it is called Madama Sui by Augusto Roa Bastos. This is one of the exciting things about researching, is that I just find a lot of books that, to be honest, I had never heard of before, including this one, so I don't know all that much about it, and the back doesn't say much about the plot itself. All we know is that there's this titular character who we know dies at the age of 20, and so we basically follow her story. She's of mixed race. I know she's, I believe, Japanese, and also has some Creole background. This is set in Paraguay, so it's very interesting to have that kind of diasporic cultural context within this history too. And so basically it's about her sexual awakening and her advocacy for female freedom and sexuality. Aside from that, I don't know much else, but it really sounds fantastic, and I don't think I've ever read anything from Paraguay, so yeah, this is going to be a much needed change. And so for April, I'm going to be obviously very excited to read this one. It's called Indios y Negros en la Cultura Dominicana, and it was written by Aida Cartagena Portalatin. So this is a compilation of basically Portalatin's essays and anthropological work from the years 1918 to 1944, about the more indigenous and Black aspects of Dominican history and culture. As a Dominican, this is exactly what I want to learn more of. I feel like there's a lot of, a lot of racial politics in the DR, let's just say. But I am just so excited to read this from one of the most lauded, celebrated poets, thinkers, writers in Dominican history. So just beyond excited for April for this one. Then for the month of May, I've chosen a short story collection. It's called Invisible, or Invisible. It was actually published last year by Carlos Oriel Winter Melo. He is a Panamanian writer, and again, this is an instance of not much information being out there about this book. I just know there are 13 short stories. It's a very introspective collection, and the characters within it find some form of self-discovery. That literally describes like practically every book ever, but I'm telling you, there's really not that much information about this one. Introspection is something that I'm a big fan of in literature. It's kind of a main aspect of literature, and so I'm excited to see a Panamanian perspective on this. So yeah, this one is called Invisible. And then for the months of June and July, I am choosing one book, and this is going to be an extra challenge for me because it will be the first book that I read fully in Portuguese. I knew it had to be this author. I wanted to read this author for very superficial reasons, and this book in particular was part of that superficial reason. Basically, the name of the book is almost exactly my last name, and recently on BookTube he has become a little bit more popular, and some of the more classic booktuber readers and reviewers, his name has popped up a lot, and I'm glad because as someone who really wants to read more Afro-Latinx literature, this author in particular is always highlighted. And I've mentioned before that I'm very fascinated by Brazil and its culture, its literature, language, all of it. So my challenge for the months of June and July is Machado de Assis. Dom Casmurro. Dom Casmurro by Machado de Assis. So, I'm a little bit worried, but let's just see how this goes. What this is about, this is, again, one of the greatest works of Brazilian literature by one of the most famous Brazilian writers ever. This is about a guy who suspects that his beloved wife is cheating on him with his best friend and that her son is not his, basically, and it's his humorous, obsessive, paranoid narration, and kind of descent into mania. Then for the month of August, I've chosen Desastres Íntimos, or Intimate Disasters, by Cristina Peri Rossi. This is a novel from Uruguay, and it was published in 1997. So as readers of this novel, we become voyeurs in the lives of these characters who enjoy very unique fetishes. So this is, of a more sexual nature, a bit more erotic, I guess, than the other books that I've mentioned so far. Lots of themes of passion and shame, and just people losing their inhibitions and just being themselves for a moment in time, and then stepping out of that kind of safe bubble of exploration into the real world that doesn't really accept them. I like switching up not just the countries that these books are from, but also the style, the themes. This is, I know, going to be a little bit more progressive than the other books I've chosen. I mean, obviously, more progressive than Don Casmurro because this one was written in the late 20th century. I think this will just add a little bit more stylistic diversity. And then we have a short story collection, another one. This one is by Siu Kam Wen, and this is called El Tramo Final, and it's essentially translated to the final stretch. There's actually, this titular story has been translated by Julie Hempel. I'm actually going to link it below. It's been translated into English. I don't believe this is translated yet into any other language, but it's original Spanish. So yes, this is from Peru. This is considered a classic of Peruvian literature and one of the best written works from the 80s. This was published in 1985. It doesn't have that much information online about it, but I, like always, really want to respect and showcase Latin America in all its races, ethnicities, backgrounds. It's a region in the world that has welcomed as well as discriminated against, but welcomed diaspora communities from all over the world. And Siu Kam Wen is of Chinese background, but born and raised in Peru, and is totally Peruvian, and so his stories explore that kind of mixed identity. I know last year I read Watanabe. He actually is of some Japanese background, and his poetry collection was one of my favorites of last year. So yeah, I'm very excited for this, and I hope we all can collectively just understand that, being Latino does not mean that you automatically cannot be Asian or any other race, because it's not a race itself. So yeah, very excited for this one as well. My October pick is one from Ecuador, and this one is written by Monica Ojeda. It is called Mandíbula, or Jawbone. This one does have an English translation available, and this one is a horror story of sorts. The main character is a teenager who likes creepypasta online stories, and so one day she's kidnapped by her literature teacher, and essentially a weird bond formed between them as the narrator discovers like why this this teacher has kidnapped her, and taking her to the middle of the woods. So that's what it's about. It sounds crazy, but again, it's just gives me a different vibe from the September pick, of course. I've intentionally chosen it for October precisely because of that. So yes, Mandíbula / Jawbone will be for scary, spooky October. My November pick hails from Chile, and her name is Lina Meruane, and the book is an autobiographical book called Sangre en el Ojo. It is based a little bit on Meruane's own experience. Basically, it's about a writer who moves to New York to get her doctoral degree to, once again become a student. And unfortunately, when she's there, she has a stroke. And basically, the whole book is her kind of reconciling with her new condition and how she's going to continue life and her studies with the effects of a stroke. And it's been lauded as, one of the best forms of autofiction and autobiography. So yeah, I'm always interested in the hybrid of nonfiction and fiction, this kind of creative nonfiction space. Autofiction is one of my favorite genres, although a little bit overused as of late, but yeah, this just sounds fascinating. And lastly, I have chosen Mary's Kondo's I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem. This is from Guadeloupe and has been translated into English by Richard Philcox. So this is based on a true story of a slave in Massachusetts whose name is Tituba, who is accused of witchcraft. And is then jailed. And so in real life, she was kind of forgotten about for a few years, but this book kind of stretches out her life and rewrites her life into old age and just gives her her power back, and a voice that she never got the chance to have or explore or share. And so it'll be really interesting to see Mary's Kondo's take on the Salem witch trials from a Black woman's perspective. I've never come across that ever. Now that I think about it, all I know is like Arthur Miller and white women being drowned as witches. So this will be really fascinating to read, and I'm sure harrowing. I've never read a Mary's Kondo book before, but if you've ever studied post-colonialism, like she's a writer whose name pops up all the time. So I say I'm very excited for all of the books, but again, just cannot wait for this one. Alright, so those were the 11 books that I plan to read this year in 2023 that span as many countries as I could fit from Latin America. Again, there are many countries, many types of people that I couldn't represent this time, but there's always next year. This is a lifelong reading challenge for myself. I do encourage anybody who does want to read more Latin American novels and authors to think beyond, the obvious choices, although again, don't not read them. They're very important and influential and beautiful as well. Marginalized voices, even within marginalized communities, are worthy of representation too. I cannot wait to share all of my thoughts and opinions on these books here that I've shared with you in later videos. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Comment down below if you have read any of these books, or if anyone sparked your interest at all. Yeah, and I will see you all next time. Thank you so much. Bye.